There's no reason why that couldn't be your story.
You don't have an expiration date.
I love that.
The actual pages. Like, that's all that matters at the end of the day.
This is the Authors and Agents podcast. Alex, I'm super excited to have you here today. I can't wait to chat with you, to pick your brain. So let's start off first by having you tell me about your novel, KILT TRIP.
Yes, I would love to. Thanks for having me. So KILT TRIP, I studied abroad in Scotland many years ago. So that's like sort of the original seed of this story. So it's set in Scotland. Addie is an American tour consultant. So her job is to basically like jet set all around the world, and she helps tour companies kind of like figure out their tour setups. Everything that she does is like pretty touristy and wants people to be on like, this is what people come to Scotland for. Like they want to go to Edinburgh Castle. Logan, his family owns a tour company in Scotland, and it's very like the hidden gems and the people that they've had, you know, been in community with for generations. And so they go to all these off the beaten path places, and they're really not doing that well. Mm-hmm. So his dad hires Addie to come in and kind of like revamp the company as he's preparing to retire. So the book starts out and she shows up in Scotland and she crashes this tour, like a city tour, to basically get a feel for how this is going. Thinking like, here's just some tour guide. He's super cute. They like have a very cute little, you know, moment. Yeah. And he thinks she's some tourist because she uses a fake name and acts like a tourist. So then when she shows up in his office and he's like, you're the person coming to like wreck everything. Right. So it really goes from this like sort of instant attraction at the beginning. And they have like this, I really love the opening. Like they're just two people used to being in these like settings where they're around people all the time, like good at chatting and, you know, flirting, to just like full on office warfare, like full enemies to lovers, lots of office pranks and fun stuff like that. Until Logan realizes Addie has a secret connection to Scotland. Her late mother and her dad had been on their honeymoon there, and she's got these pictures of her mom, but they're in like remote places. She doesn't know where they were. So he finds that out and ends up designing like a tour for her. They go find these places. So lots of fun, lots of like workplace and enemies to lovers, but then, you know, really pulls back into sort of the themes of like belonging and finding, you know, your found family and places that feel like home. Because for me, someone actually recently said this to me, like, I always feel homesick for Scotland. And I was like, that is such a perfect way to put it, because I feel that pull there. Like, anytime I'm there, I'm just like, my soul just feels so happy being here. Yeah, so that's a long answer to that question.
I love it. So exciting. Well, this is like, I'm sure, such a dream come true to have your book coming out into the world. So tell me a little bit about your journey up to this point, you know, to having your book published.
Yeah. So I was not ever like thought of myself as a writer. I think a lot of people are like, I've been writing stories since I was 5. I was really never like that. So I feel like it was more when my youngest son turned 1 and I kind of hit that stage of motherhood where you're like, I want to reclaim myself or have something that's not about nap schedules and, you know, like just something of my own. So I went to Chicago with both my kids and my mom and my aunt watched my kids and my cousin's kids, and me and my cousins went into Chicago and had dinner like in the city. And then went and saw Hamilton, and I was just like, this is the greatest night of my life. But I honestly felt like so inspired by like, the show is obviously fantastic.
Amazing.
But I came home and I was just like, I'm going to write a book. and then, you know, we speed right into pandemic times. So that was like my escape. Like, for homeschooling. I mean, my son was like a year and a half. Like, it was just, you know. So that felt very much like, okay, well, in the evenings, I will go to Scotland and leave this mess. And then I eventually realized, like, you can't just write a book by yourself. So I met someone who introduced me to someone who read my book, and ultimately her feedback was like, I think you've got a strong voice, but you should learn like 1 or 2 things about story structure. Like, I had just sat down and wrote about, like, you can write 80,000 words. Don't necessarily mean it's a story.
They don't necessarily go anywhere, but it was 80,000 words.
They don't. They just sort of wandered about. So I cried in the grocery store parking lot reading that email, but she was right. So at that point, I really got into like the craft component and took classes and read books and got into a critique group. And so that really, I think, learned a lot, to the point where I was like, I think this original book is just like not salvageable. It'll be so much more work to fix that than to just start something new. So
yeah,
that's when I started KILT Trip. And I think, this whole process really, every time I think I get to this point and you're like, it's done. It's not done. So I had applied to Pitch Wars. I think that mentorship program is not happening anymore, but it was so fantastic. But they basically paired published authors with aspiring authors, and just a fantastic program. So I applied to that one year, didn't get in. I did a whole bunch of rewrites of that book, applied the next year, and I did get in, and pretty much rewrote the whole ending with my mentor, who is Amanda Elliott. And she was just so fantastic and like really saw like what I was trying to do. I felt like she had this idea for the end, and I was like, yes, that is the thing I like couldn't get over. Yeah. And then from there, that had an agent showcase, so I feel like that like really truncated the process that usually just goes on forever. Forever. Querying, man. So that was really like agents were kind of coming to the showcase. Everyone had a web page that had like their pitch and their first page or something. So we were kind of getting requests to go query from that. So that sped things up a lot. So I signed with my agent out of that, who's Jill Marr, and she's just so fantastic. Like I could not ask for better. And then we pretty much went right on sub from there. Like it felt very much like a lot of momentum coming out of Pitch Wars, and they had announced that was the end of the program. And from there, it was like, I think that editors read my book fairly quickly, but it felt like forever.
Oh, I'm
like
sure.
It was just so miserable. And I feel like people give you the advice to like just write through the wait, like go on to something else. And I just feel like I just couldn't get over myself enough to do that. I was just like, instead, I could just sit here and like refresh my email for endless days. That feels better for me. So that was not awesome. And I got a lot of feedback that was like, love this armchair read to Scotland. It was so fun, but like, I don't know how to position it, which is really hard feedback because it's like, there's nothing I can fix about that. And it feels like this kind of flawed premise. So I ended up selling my book on a revise and resubmit, which, happy ending, but it was definitely hard feeling like I had gotten far with other publishing houses and having like a marketing team or a sales team be like, like we don't really know what to do with this. Felt like even if I totally knock this R&R out of the park and the editor loves it, still has to go through all these other people that have to say yes to it. So I was definitely spent like a summer revising that. I'm just
like, I'm gonna do this, but I'm not that quite happy about it.
I'm not gonna like it.
Yeah.
Like I loved her feedback. I thought, like, I remember first hearing what she had, and I was just like, oh, like how did we miss that? Like there was this big structural thing, and I ended up like moving pieces kind of across the arcs. So definitely made the book stronger, but it was just like it felt a little hopeless, I guess. But it was also like, well, I've come so far. I don't want to just be like, I'm just giving up now. And so, and then, kind of you wait a long time even after that was turned back in. And then one day I was at Wells Fargo opening a business bank account, and my agent called and screamed into Wells Fargo and ran outside, and she was like, we sold your book. Woo! So all's well that ends well. But I think, you talk to people all the time. I think this journey is just often very long.
It's very long. And I think, a lot of the times we think of like, oh, I got my agent. It's over. Like I did it. I have succeeded. I have made it. But it's like there's not as much focus on the after part of all of that comes after, signing with your agent. And, books that don't sell, or like you said, like you can still do a revise and resubmit even through that process. It's never ending. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's some component of this industry just has so much of the like moving goalpost, right? Like getting an agent, like that is the first big thing that you have to do if you're on a traditional track.
Yeah.
But there is all the stuff afterwards, and for better or worse, I think we continue to push those out.
Yes, we do. Well, I know that your querying process was a little different than maybe just cold querying.
Yeah.
But looking back on it now, and maybe what you've known from other writers, like what would your maybe like top query advice be for authors who are setting out on that strenuous journey?
Yes, the strenuous journey. I mean, I do think one component of that is like have the right expectations, and I think, easier said than done, obviously. And I felt it feels very similar to being on submission too. So I think it's the same thing. Like you hear people that are like, I got my agent overnight. I got my book deal overnight.
Yeah.
And you're like secretly walking into that situation like, but that could be me, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like you don't say that. You don't like really think that, but there's that hope that's like, maybe we could just not do this and just like have it done. So I think just some amount of expectation setting of like, this is a long process. And I think the reality of like, agents take on so few clients a year that the amount of queries that they have to read to find that book that they want to represent, I think there's just sometimes this misconception in the writing community sort of pre-querying that's like the agent's job is to like sit around and read all of these queries and like find their next person. And it's like once you're on the other side of that, you're like, I want my agent to answer my emails.
Exactly.
So I think there's just like there's some component of that too that's like the urgency as a writer is so high. Like you're putting your work out there. It's so vulnerable. And then to have someone on the other side, you're like, why are you not just getting to this right now? Like, why are you not providing feedback? And I totally get that feeling. And so I think just maybe some understanding of like the other side of that is, it's just not the same urgency there.
Definitely.
But I think the other thought I have on that, because I freelance edit, so I do a lot of like query packages with people, is like really polishing up that query package. I think there are some, there's always the spectrum of people, right? Some people are like, I'm going to work on this forever because there's always more tweaking to do. But I think some people are like, well, the whole reason of having an agent and having an editor is like, because they're going to help me work on this. And I think that everything is just so competitive right now that you want like the absolute best query that you can have. So I thought it was really helpful. Like, coming from Pitchwares, there was like some built-in community there of people who were in the same place, but we were all like swapping query letters and giving feedback. And there were Facebook groups. There's like for romance, I'm trying to think if it was like the Kiss Pitch group. But there were a bunch of Facebook groups where I was like putting my query letter in there and getting feedback and like critiquing other people's. And I think some amount of that, like critiquing other people's, you can really see like what stands out in a query. But I think feeling really solid about especially that query letter going into querying. And then, there's kind of two big schools of thought on, do you just sit down one day and like query everyone? Or do you have like your tiers of different people? And my hot take is I think if you feel really solid with your query letter, I think that the agents don't give the feedback that they used to be able to be like, oh, I really need to change my query. I really need to change this. That it just prolongs this process by like querying in these batches. And like if you get a request really early on or you get an offer really early on, it's like you haven't queried all the people that you might be a great match with. So there's risk in that, obviously. Like once you shoot your shot, it's out there. But I think that's my take on it, is just that you aren't going to get a lot of feedback from people that's going to tell you like I need to make changes. And so if you feel confident, like get them out there. And
I think that's such a good perspective on it, because we do hear that advice that's like make your tiers and query some and wait 6 weeks or however long it is, right? But if you're confident in your query letter and you've had it revised, you've worked with people, you've had random people read it, right, to really see what
does this make any sense?
Right. Does this make sense? Or what are they really getting from my query letter? You're right. You're not going to get a whole lot of feedback from agents. The feedback is going to be, hey, we're passing, or hey, I want to read some pages, right? But they're not going to be like, this part of your query didn't work for me, or things like that. So if you're confident in it, send it out. And then if nothing happens from it, there's really nothing else you could do from that point, besides adjusting your query letter a little bit. But if it's good and you're confident in it, there's not a whole lot of purpose in that from my perspective.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think as far as the feedback piece, like I think there's just a lot of no answer that's happening more and more and more.
Yeah.
Like even when I was sort of in my, like I had gotten an offer and I had queried a bunch of people, and so I was like nudging, there were a lot of people who requested my full, said that they would read on the time frame, and then I just never heard from them again. And I was like, I mean,
Yeah.
you said you were going to. So
Like,
I think
what's
there's
going
just a
on?
lot of, I think there's just a lot of that of like, I think agents just get inundated. And so the only way to really handle this is just like, I will reach out if I want more. So I just think that there is a huge lack of feedback loop there.
Well, and I think your point that you made about how like it's such an urgent thing. It's at the top of a writer's mind, right, when they're querying. But like
Constantly.
looking at it from an agent's perspective, which hey, plug for all the agent interviews, go listen because they tell you like querying is one little part of what they do.
Totally.
And like from your perspective with your agent, you know, she's working with everybody on her list. She's got all of that. She's working with editors. She's, you know, coordinating so many things. And so they have so much to do. So it's not the same level of urgency. And so, I mean, that's definitely a disconnect, but that's something that writers need to remember as they go into it, right? It kind of takes the pain level down a little bit if you let it.
Yeah. And I guess on that note, like the other thing that I always recommend people do is make a separate Gmail for querying to just like, you can have that on or off. But I felt like with, you know, your email goes and you're like, is it a query?
And you're like, no, it's Old Navy. Dang it.
It's Old Navy. It's always Old Navy. And you're like,
always
damn it, Old Navy.
It's always Old Navy.
Yeah. So I think kind of being able to keep that separate so that you don't have, I don't know. I mean, this is again, me talking about this as if that's not exactly what I was doing, like obsessing and just checking stuff all the time. But, you know, as many like boundaries and parameters you can put on like a super emotional time, I think the better.
Definitely. I think that is good advice. So back on KILT Trip, what is something you hope that readers take away from this story?
I mean, I think one of the things that I've already heard that I just love so much is people like, I want to book a trip there. Like, to me, there's just so, like, this is such my love letter to Scotland. Like, I think it's such a fantastic place. It's so different than other places I've been. Like, there's just this color of green there that just doesn't exist other places, like maybe in Ireland. But I think that I really wanted to show, you know, especially the hidden gem kind of places that I had been that were just so impactful and magical and like everything. It just feels like there's so many time travel books and stuff set there and you go there and you're like, I can see it. Like, you could just slip back through time. Like there's just something like magical in the air there. So I think I really wanted people to take away that component of it. And then the other piece is just kind of like that like taking risks. I mean, Logan is very set in his ways and he has reason for it, and like he wants his tours a certain way because he loves them like that, and he's got the community, but there's also some amount of fear of making any changes, and Addie is obviously sort of the opposite of that, where she's really pushing him. But I love the idea of like taking chances and trying new things, and like the world is just so full of opportunity and possibility when we let ourselves reach for that, and it's very vulnerable and scary because you may fail, right? Like we have this instinct to protect ourselves. So I just think that there's something really beautiful in like reaching for something unexpected and, you know, hoping for the best. And often I think the world like rewards us for taking those big steps.
I think so. I love it. Well, I'm so excited for it to come out to the general public, for everybody to be able to experience your love letter to Scotland. So speaking about your personal preference, you know, who are some of your favorite authors that you love to read? Like maybe an instant read author, and why do you love reading them?
Yeah. This is like the hardest question. You know that, right? You're like, what's your favorite song of all time?
Okay, it doesn't have to be all time, like maybe just recently, because sometimes for me, my authors change based on like what my hyperfixation is at that time, you know?
Yes. I did just read The Villain Edit by Sarah Brenton, and it's like celebrity road trip, enemies to lovers. He's like Hollywood golden boy and like cast and superhero, and the franchise is like, you're not gritty enough for this. Like he needs like to tarnish his reputation a bit. And then the heroine is like reality TV show villain, like she needs a glow up, she's never working again kind of thing, and they end up going on this like cross country road trip, and they just hate each other at the beginning of it, and it just like the banter is so great and it's super steamy. So that one's super fun. But I think other favorite authors, Susanna Kearsley writes more like historical fiction that has a lot of strong romantic elements, but I think she writes such like evocative, immersive settings, and I feel like that's where like my love of writing settings that way came from. Like she does a lot of kind of time slip romance where like they'll be kind of walking down this path and then they like slip back, but they like come back and forth through the time periods and stuff.
Interesting.
And like so it's like the same setting in two different times. So she just does such a fantastic job with that. I think I've always been really drawn to that kind of immersive setting. And then Kate Clayborne is always a favorite. I feel like when you read her stuff, there's just like so much intentionality around the character arcs. And she does such a cool job of, I feel like her characters are almost always total opposites, but then it's like they complement each other exactly. Like the thing that they're weakest in is the thing the other person is strongest in. So together, they're just like, it really pushes, each character pushes the other one to like grow in the place that they need to. So I always love reading her stuff and just be like, how are you so good at this?
Teach me your ways.
Teach me. Like I just want to like put your book in a spreadsheet and just understand how you've made this magic happen. Yeah, I do. And then K.A. Tucker is one of my other favorites. I feel like she really, I read The Simple Wild while I was somewhere editing KILT TRIP. And I think I was really struggling with like, is this a romance? Is this a rom-com? Is this women's fiction? Like it's got that kind of like searching for her, like this connection to her late mom, kind of grief and healing through it. So there's like some strong women's fiction elements, but then there's also like they're literally having office pranks and stuff. So there's a lot of like rom-com moments. And I think I was really struggling with like, what does this balance look like? And can you call this a rom-com if it's doing this other stuff? So anyway, I really loved The Simple Wild because I felt like they had a lot of the same vibe between them, like the enemies to lovers vibe, but also with just like this really tough backstory. So I feel like that was really inspiring to me to be like, okay, I loved this book so much. That's what I want to do too. I feel like it kind of gave me permission to like go all in on the stuff I wanted to do. So that was a big like, I don't know, inspiration moment for me with that book.
I love that. I love when you can, I love that you said it kind of gave you permission. You saw someone else who did it really well and you're like, okay, this is sort of exactly what I'm going for. Okay, someone else did it. Yeah, I can do it too.
Yeah. Well, and just feeling like, okay, this really resonated with me. So like, it can work. It's not people are like, where are we right now? Are we laughing? Are we crying? Like we can do all of it. It's
we can do all of it. I love the combination of the laughing and the crying. Yeah. And then we laugh again and we cry again. It's perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, tell me, what is your, most enjoyable thing about writing for you? And then what is like the most challenging thing about writing?
I think the early, I don't come up with ideas very easily or quickly. So I think that early drafting stage where it's like, let's write a whole book about these people that I don't know yet. Right. I find that really stressful. I have a lot of critique partners that just really thrive in that creative space. And they're like, anything's possible. And I'm like, that's terrifying. That's like, what's the right answer?
Too much.
So yeah, I feel like that decision fatigue will set in at some point. So I find the early parts hard. I really like when I've had a full draft done and I can kind of put that into, like I do put stuff into a spreadsheet and kind of track like per scene, like is the romance arc moving? Is the external arc moving? Are the character arcs moving? And then that makes me feel like really confident in the structure of the story. And then from there, I feel like I usually know the characters well enough that day-to-day life feels like, oh, that girl's wearing this like little necklace with this like tiny blue charm on it. And like, this character would totally wear that, where you're like picking up details from real life and you feel like you actually know these people that you've invented. So I feel like much later stage, I feel is the most fun and like adding the details and the flavor to the story. I like that better.
Adding the tiny little details that like flesh out the character and the story as like a real person, because let's be real, they're very real to us. They're very real to us.
Yeah.
I love that. So we've got this wonderful rom-com with, some deeper themes. But if you were to genre hop, try writing something completely different, what would you want to write?
I feel like I would probably just go into like a women's fiction space. I am loving this like romantasy boom that's happening right now, but I don't know that I have the
either.
brain to make that like a whole world. Seems
I don't.
so hard. I love reading that, but I think part of reading that is so nice, like especially when I'm drafting and I want to like pick apart what people are doing and like, how did you do this? Like reading romantasy, I'm just like, I could never do this. So like I can just settle in and love this. It feels like easier to read when I'm in that headspace. So yeah, I feel like, I mean, romance has just always been the space that I want to be in. I think I've like always loved it. I was just telling somebody, I think I didn't know the genre conventions before being like starting writing, but I would read books and like flip to the end to make sure everyone I loved was still alive. Like I don't like the uncertainty of things. And so I think having romance of like, I can settle into like all the hard feelings because we're promised this ending. So I think there's still a lot more space inside romance to explore for me for now.
I think so. I think, I just got started on a romance kick last year after interviewing the lovely Jessica Joyce, who blurbed your book.
Fave. Yes.
So I read hers, Year with a View, and I was like immediately obsessed. I was like, I have to read every single romance book. Because like I have terrible anxiety just about life in general. So to read something where I'm like, the world. But I was like, to know that these two people are going to end up happy and that everything will be okay just takes... it just like makes it so much better. And I still do love a good murder mystery or, all of those other types of things. But yeah, knowing that there's going to be that happily ever after at the end just really calms my soul.
Totally. I love that.
So tell me, who has been the biggest supporter of your writing?
I feel like so many people. I feel like, have to do the husband plug here. Like he's been awesome. Especially... Well, really, this whole process, I feel like he has just made it like, this is the thing you want to pursue. Like, take the space, pursue it. So that's been awesome. I think especially like in the last month where I'm like, there's a lot of leading up into debut stuff. And then my second book is due to my editor 2 weeks after KILT TRIP comes out. So I'm like in the thick of editing that book right now. So it just feels like, a lot going on. So he's been awesome of like, just disappear and like, I will handle life. It's fine. Yeah. Your work.
Do your work.
But then I think, so my critique partners, I was just talking about the villain edit. So Sarah Brenton is one of my critique partners and Maggie North. And so we met pre-Pitch Wars. They weren't actually in Pitch Wars the year before me. So I feel like we've gone through like mentorships and getting agents and book deals and indie publishing. And I feel like they really get my writing and what I'm trying to do. And I really get their writing and what they're trying to do. And it's so fun having people who like sometimes can tell me what I'm trying to do. Like, here are these words and I don't know what's happening. And they're like, this is, we know.
We see this.
So they've been fantastic. And I think just having the community of like, you get what's going on, you get the ups and downs of this and like celebrating the great things. And like the days when you're like, I just need to drape over the group chat because writing is hard and having people who get that and support it. So, they're fantastic. And then, my agent and editor are also so lovely. I absolutely love working with both of them and feel so supported. Like they're just both super responsive and I think they, I think agents and editors can feel like celebrities when we first enter these relationships. Like you do so much research on everyone, and then you're like, okay, now you're a star and we're talking. So I think, getting to the point where it's like, these celebrities really love my book, like they decided to work on this book too. And so it's really fun being like, I got Logan bookmarks and I like mail them and they're like, we're taking pictures with the Logan bookmark. And just having people that are like as invested in this book as I am is just a really fantastic space to be in. So shout out to them too.
I love it. Yes, they definitely feel like mystical creatures at a certain point, right? And then you're like, you're just a person like me who also loves this.
Creature.
Yes. Well, that is wonderful. I think everybody needs to have writer friends who, like you said, can just like bear with you when you're in the thick of it, and you're just like, please help me. Like I don't. And you know what? That is exactly what they're there for. And shout out to Maggie North because her book Rules for Second Chances is amazing.
So good.
So good. So good.
Yeah.
I read it in so quickly because it felt so fresh to me, like very, very well done. Very good.
I love her voice.
Yeah. So I've got just a couple questions left for you. Fun.
Yeah.
Ish. Well, the last one maybe could be fun. But I'd love to know when you're writing, editing, what do you always like have to snack on or have to drink as you're doing it?
I drink a lot of tea.
What kind of tea?
Mostly chai. Sometimes an English breakfast. I go back and forth. I eat a lot of my kids' goldfish, and actually Maggie North the other day was like, "Don't you just feel like goldfish are like really not satisfying?" And I was like, "Are you kidding? They're so satisfying. Like I just sit there and like eat them and eat them." And she's like, "But at the end, do you feel satisfied, or do you just like keep eating them because they're like not actually satisfying?" And I was like, "You're right.
She's right.
She's right.
She's
I can just eat them endlessly because they're like never quite enough."
No.
But yeah, I actually have been trying very hard lately to like eat grown-up meals in the day. Sometimes I'm like, I will have a cheese quesadilla for the whole afternoon. And like,
okay, don't knock a cheese quesadilla. My favorite is what we call a hot cheese roll, which is with like cheese.
Tell me more.
Popped on just one tortilla, popped in the microwave for like 45 seconds, and then you roll it up. It's like the best snack.
I feel like this is what I have but folded, but I'm going to try this.
It really is exactly what you have folded, but something about it being rolled up is just like the perfect vehicle, paper towel, and that's my lunch.
I was going to say you're like dripping cheese grease.
Paper towel underneath.
Okay. Yes, important detail.
It's like the perfect snack. My son loves it when I like cut it into like little mini rolls. That's his favorite kind of lunch. We love cheese quesadillas. Yes, we love hot cheese rolls.
So funny.
But you know, when you're at this stage of life, sometimes you just eat what your kids don't eat.
You do.
Eat the same things. Yeah.
You do. That is so true.
So my last question, I'd love to know what your favorite book is right now. Not your favorite book of all time, but just something you've read recently that you want to tell people about. Easy. Super easy question.
Super easy. I feel like the book that really stuck with me last year is The Art of Scandal by Regina Black. It's just so well written. I just feel like the whole time I was just like, wow. But it starts out, what swear words am I allowed to say on this?
Say what you want to say.
Okay. It starts out, so like the main character is married to this politician. She's like hosting his birthday party with all these like sucky guys, and he sends her a dick pic, and she's like, "This is not for me." So I just feel like fantastical. Like chapter 1, I was just like, I am in.
You're sold. You're like, I'm invested. Tell me more.
Yes. So she basically goes to him and is like, I want a divorce, and he's like, it will tank my campaign. So she agrees to stay with him, like fake married, for $1 million. But she can't be with anyone else. And since this is romance, like, enter the hero, right?
Love it.
It was just, like, so juicy, so well written. The characters are fantastic. So I loved that one. That was so great.
Okay, well, I'm sold on it now, too. I need to read it. Well, exciting. Thank you so much for letting me pick your brain, for, letting me and my listeners to get to know you a little bit more. I'm so excited for KILT Trip to come out into the world and for Scotland to see a little uptick in I mean, I know they're tourists, they are probably crazy, but to have even more because of your love letter.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
Super fun.